And good morning and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Hispanic Serving Institutions Division's second event to honor Hispanic Heritage Month. We are honored and delighted to have with us Cristina Chavarria from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, sharing with us today a dynamic presentation on the nation's Hispanic heritage at the museum. Cristina will be sharing with us the multitude of teaching and learning opportunities through the museum's physical center, website resources, the Belfer National Conference for Educators, workshops with Holocaust organizations around the country, and its Spanish language educational materials. We hope that this vast array of resources is helpful to you, grades 6 through 16 teachers, students, the Department of Education's grantees, and others interested in learning accurate and meaningful content about the Holocaust. We are truly honored and humbled to have with us Phil Rosenfeld, the department's Deputy General Counsel and former Acting Secretary of Education, providing official opening remarks. In addition, Phil was a member of the team that planned the first Holocaust Remembrance Committee that eventually grew into the Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Committee that has now celebrated 30 years. Before I introduce Cristina, please allow me to remind you that this Thursday at 2 p.m. via Zoom and in the LBJ Auditorium, the Hispanic Serving Institutions Division will host its third and final event for Hispanic Heritage Month, a fireside chat with 5 distinguished chancellors and presidents of universities from Puerto Rico on the topics of resilience in the Puerto Rican higher education community, Puerto Rican identity, and navigating 2 cultures in higher education. Also, regarding housekeeping for this webinar, please remember to keep your cameras off and microphones muted while the presentations are being given. If you have questions or comments, please place them in the chat. We will also have time for questions and comments at the end of Cristina's presentation. Finally, please know that we will share the slides and a resource document with all attendees today after the meeting. So please do not worry about getting the slides. We will get them to you. Now to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Cristina Chavarria. Cristina is a program coordinator in the William Levine Family Institute for Holocaust Education at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Cristina currently runs the museum's Community of Holocaust Education Centers program that works with 77 Holocaust organizations around the country. She is also part of a team overseeing the museum's implementation of H.R. 943, the Never Again Education Act, which is federal legislation that will implement Holocaust education around the United States. I think someone is not muted, so if you would please mute yourself, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Cristina has also represented the museum across the United States and in Europe, Latin America, and Japan. Previously, Cristina served as Director of Education at the Holocaust Museum in Houston. Prior to that, she was a high school English teacher for 9 years in El Paso, Texas, the city of her birth. Cristina earned her Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in Comparative Literature from the University of Dallas. Thank you so very much for being with us here, Cristina. And thank you, Phil, for honoring us with your presence. I now turn the floor over to you, Phil.
So thank you, Margarita, and I want to welcome all of the people here today and all who may be viewing this recorded version later on. to a program sponsored by the Hispanic Serving Institution Division at the Office of Post-Secondary Education at the Department, commemorating Hispanic Heritage Month. When I was asked by Margarita to provide some opening remarks at today's program, I felt honored, and I thought about the importance of doing it. Partly today, with rather horrific things going on in the Middle East, it seems even more important that we talk today about the Holocaust, the resources, and the lessons that we've learned from it. Margarita talked about the program that she and her division had in mind on the nation's Hispanic heritage and the information that's available at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I thought, I must do this. For one, I'm lucky enough to be the department's representative to the Holocaust Memorial Museum Council, or its board of directors, as Margarita mentioned. I'm an ex officio non-voting member, and I've had the privilege in serving in that capacity for a number of years. I faithfully attend each council meeting. I attend a lot of the events of the Holocaust Museum, the speakers, and other programs they have. And in the council, I offer the perspective of the department as best I can, and its work on matters that relate to the museum's mission, such as its work on equity, an opportunity to give all people a chance to get away from bias and stereotypes, learning from the lessons of the Holocaust and how it really goes to the importance of education and effective teaching and learning. I want to hear from department people on how I could best represent the department with the Holocaust Museum, and I welcome your feedback, obviously now and later on. At the council meetings, there's a lot of talk about how the museum's exhibits can be made as valuable as possible, how the education programs that the museum sponsors can really help, and how we could learn from the heroes of how they made it through. Many of them are volunteers at the museum. And I've learned about the heroes, the victims, the perpetrators, the eyewitnesses. It has been an incredible learning experience for me, and it contributes to my work at the department every day to learn from those lessons. As Margarita said, I serve in the office of the general counsel, and I have many opportunities to learn and implement and administer the funds that we have to give schools and students of all ages to help our mission of equal opportunity for all. And many of our programs serve Hispanic students, including our current secretary, who was a non-native English speaker in kindergarten and learned from some of the programs in his school that our department and its predecessor had a role in setting up in litigation for the rights of English language learners and in our programs. So again, it seems incredibly important that we gather here today. So with the connections to today's program, I jumped on the opportunity to provide opening remarks because I knew that I would use it to learn more and more about Hispanic Heritage Month, its history, its expansion from a week to a month, the contributions of many Hispanic people to our nation at various times, and especially during World War II. all of the many contributions that Hispanic American troops played in World War II. I know that we do not direct or control curriculum at the department. It's a state and local level decision, but I'm hopeful that programs like today's and the resources that Christina will talk about will be very helpful to schools across the country and enhance their teaching and learning about the Holocaust and the lessons that it teaches us. I also learned about other museums, such as the Houston Holocaust Museum that Christina mentioned is part of her background, that also has incredibly valuable resources. And I started exploring them, and I know that Christina will talk about them. And right away, they made an incredible contribution to me and my work that lies ahead. We obviously can learn much from the Holocaust, and I have done that in the years of serving as a council member and in also outside activities such as a trip to Germany that I've been chaperone on for maybe 25, 27 years, learning more and more about how Germany teaches about the Holocaust, talking with various people who were eyewitnesses, families of perpetrators, families of victims, and victims themselves. And it has enriched my life and my professional career greatly, as I hope today's program and the resources that we talk about will enrich yours. I recently attended a presentation by a 95-year-old survivor of the Holocaust who talked about the experience he had as a child trying to survive. His family converted him from Judaism to Catholicism. He tried to um, be as open as possible to what he needed to do to survive. There were families in his hometown that did a lot to protect him and to save him from danger. His life was an experience that he talked about that was just so inspiring. And we talked afterwards about what it was and why do people help save the lives of others who are under attack, and they themselves, when they help, are risking their own lives and the lives of their families. And he said to me that's something that he continues to wonder about, to learn about, but he is overall so gratified by those who made those sacrifices and who helped him survive and live a very fruitful life, now well into his 90s, still very productive, speaking at schools, talking with children, speaking at universities. And through my preparation today for this program, I learned that there were many Hispanic Americans, including people living in Latin American countries, who did a tremendous amount during the war to take in refugees who were escaping from Nazism, helping them build a new life. And again, it's interesting to think about what motivates them, what motivates Hispanic American troops during World War II, who may not have been treated all that well in their daily lives, but being incredibly heroic in their wartime lives to risk their life for other potential victims. During Hispanic Heritage Month and throughout the year into the next Hispanic Heritage Month, I hope we will take the lessons that we learned today, the contributions of Hispanic Americans who have been heroic, who have contributed so much to the war effort at the time and continue to contribute to our mission and the importance of ensuring an equal opportunity for everyone. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Christina, who's program coordinator of the William Levine Family Institute for Holocaust Education at the museum. And I've learned to become a friend of William Levine, who's done so much and with his family to contribute to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. And with that, it's my privilege and pleasure to turn it over to Christina.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rosenfeld, and to Margarita for the very generous introductions. And thank you to everybody who's here. We know this is a very busy time of year. When is it not busy for educators? It's a year-round job. It's a vocation, and I know that so many of us are just so honored to be in this field. It has its challenges, but I really strongly feel that working together, we can accomplish so much, and so much of the information that we have at the museum, we're so honored to be sharing it with you, and we encourage you to stay in touch with the museum's programs, which I'll talk a little bit more about toward the end. But also, I want to just say that it is really heartening and heartwarming to be with you this morning in light of the events that took place starting Saturday morning. It's a very challenging and trying time. I know many are survivors, and our community is impacted by the events in Israel. And so it means so much more today to be with you, also to be with you to help close out this tremendous month where we look at Hispanic heritage and the contributions that Hispanics make, but also on how we can create links and connections for students who may not see themselves in this history, which I'll talk a little bit more about, and that's that importance. So if we can go to the next slide. Looking at the museum here, this is the official entrance of the museum. We are located at 100 Raoul Wallenberg Place, Southwest. We are right on the mall with the Washington Monument close to us. The street is actually 15th Street, but the portion of the street that we are on is named after Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat who is one of those heroes who stood up and, at the risk of his own life, helped to rescue many Jews from Hungary, also some from Romania toward the end of the war. So we're honored to be on a portion of the street that bears his name. And so we are the nation's living memorial to the Holocaust. And our charge is to help inspire citizens worldwide to confront hatred, prevent genocide, and also to promote human dignity. So through the William Levine Family Institute for Holocaust Education, we are the global leader in advancing the relevance of the Holocaust to a new generation. So if we go to the next slide, to that end, we are a trusted provider of quality Holocaust educational resources to school administrators and teachers. And through that, we are trying to build, and we have had quite a bit of success, thankfully, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We are helping to build the field of Holocaust education in the United States by providing the resources that help students and teachers and anybody who wants to learn about the Holocaust, how and why the Holocaust happened. That has been an enormous challenge. For several years, we looked strictly at the history. And then after our 10-year anniversary, we started to consider what this history means for the broader public. And especially with our location on the National Mall, where millions of visitors come from all over the world, what does this mean to a changing public, the changing face of education? And how do we start to build these bridges? So we decided that because our classrooms are more diverse than ever, and that our students bring a repertoire of languages with them, we needed to look at translating our lesson plans to Spanish and also to build our resources aside from our lesson plans that we have to also translate those to Spanish. So that's what I'm going to speak about today, because we understand that 13.5% of US residents in the United States speak Spanish at home. It's the second most prevalent language for student English learners. And also, as a cultural connection, we know that over a quarter of students in public classrooms today are of Latino descent. So we're going to share many resources from the museum with you today. It's not going to be exhaustive, but we will provide a document. I've shared a document with Margarita to give to you at the end of the presentation so that you can have the links to go to our website and see what we have online. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we did in considering the changing face of our classrooms and the different use of languages, and Spanish being the most prevalent after English, and also understanding that many students who come from certain countries, especially from countries that are not on the European continent, that they might have a difficult time in understanding or even connecting to this history at first. So in May, we hosted a webinar. We called it Construyendo Puentes, or Building Bridges, bringing Holocaust education to the Spanish-speaking world. And this was our first broad attempt to reach Spanish-speaking languages. And since that time, we have had an increase in interest in our resources, but of course, we want to continue to build this. So we have, along with some of our colleagues in Holocaust remembrance and education, we have translated these resources to meet the growing need of the Spanish-speaking population. And these are resources that we encourage being used in Spanish classes where students are learning Spanish, in ELL classes for those who are learning English as a second language, and also in dual language courses. But also it's important that these resources be accessible to teachers of social studies and English language arts, where the Holocaust is more often taught. One of the things that we look at is the fact that teachers have such precious little time to teach about the Holocaust. And so their students may only have, in some cases, 2 or 3 days to study this history. And if they're learning it in English, and English is not their first language, and they're still learning English, it's important because this is such a critical and complex and profound history. It's important that we have Spanish language resources available to them so that they don't miss anything in translation. So using our resources really helps us to understand how and why the Holocaust happened. So if we go to the next slide. We looked at some of the goals that we wanted to accomplish in working with teachers who might be interested in using these resources. How and why the Holocaust happened is a dominant question for us at the museum. And pretty much everything that we put out goes to helping to address that question. We also, with regard to our changing landscape in the classrooms and in our visitors, we also wanted to make sure that the resources that we translated in Spanish could help to build language fluency, but along with that, also promote critical thinking skills, especially historical thinking skills, which are so crucial to the work that we do in education at the museum. The other thing that we wanted to do was to honor the heritage and the language and the background of students in our classrooms and also the visitors who come to our museums. And understanding that cultural competency can help to build that connection to students who at first don't see themselves in this history was really key. And we also wanted to show how the Holocaust impacted the Spanish-speaking world, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But this was also something that was touched on earlier when we researched the history of Latin America and looking at Latin American countries that did help, that did bring refugees to their countries, that helped them to come to their countries. We will also talk a little bit about that. So if we go to the next slide, what is really fundamental to teaching any history is to lay the foundation of the history. And it's also key for understanding that question, how and why did the Holocaust happen? This is why our online Holocaust encyclopedia is very important to a lot of the lesson plans that we have created. It has now been translated to 20 languages, and it provides a lot of the historical content, the context, and also that aspect of cultural competency. We have worked very hard to translate into Spanish, and now we feature almost 1,000 articles, Holocaust Encyclopedia articles in Spanish. You will find information in the encyclopedia articles not only on the history of the Holocaust, but the history of anti-Semitism and a general overview of Nazi ideology and also the role of ordinary people in the persecution and the murder of European Jews, and also those who did help Jewish victims. The encyclopedia also includes many articles on U.S. immigration policies in the 1930s as well. So you can see right here in this slide, you see just the top screenshot of our article in Spanish on the introduction to the Holocaust. And then you see the top of the page of our article on anti-Semitism. And again, you will receive the document with all of the links to these Holocaust Encyclopedia articles. So if we go to the next slide, within the article, we also want to illustrate how the Holocaust impacts individuals. If you've ever visited the museum, the first thing that you received is you get on the elevator to go upstairs to begin the tour of the permanent exhibition, you receive an ID card. And these ID cards are available on our website as PDFs, and we have translated hundreds of them to Spanish. So here you see an ID card for a man named David Bayer. David Bayer was from Poland. He was sent to Auschwitz. He lost almost all of his family. He went on a death march and he was liberated. And then he went to Panama. So he has that connection with Latin America. He lived for 8 years in Panama before he came to the United States. He was a very active volunteer at the museum. Sadly, we lost David earlier this year, but he did live to be 100 years old and 8 months. And I'm very honored to say that he was a dear friend of mine. He was somebody I got to work with many times, and especially when we had Spanish-speaking audiences, he always made himself available to give his testimony in Spanish. And he had a wonderful connection with many students who were learning English and who spoke Spanish as a first language. He really knew how to draw them into this history. So David's ID card is one of hundreds that we have translated to look at the personal impact of the Holocaust. So if we go to the next slide, we also see that we have Holocaust Encyclopedia articles that touch specifically on the Spanish-speaking world. We do have an article that addresses Latin American countries as potential places for refuge for European Jews, but we also have an article that shows the connections between the Spanish Civil War and the Holocaust. This article is an example of cultural competency because it shows how a Spanish-speaking country's history intersects with the Holocaust and the role that the Holocaust played in that particular country. The Spanish Civil War was the first fascist conflict in Europe, and the article describes how Nazi Germany provided aid to General Franco's nationalist uprising by providing aerial attacks on cities such as Guernica. If you're familiar with the Picasso painting, that was due in large part to Germany providing this aerial attack. We also, in the article, describe the role of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories among Spanish nationalists as a reason to overthrow the Republican government. And also, we look at how a Spanish-speaking country's history and culture is key to Spanish classes, as well as ELL and dual language courses too. So in our next slide, we highlight a 38-minute film that's called The Path to Nazi Genocide. This is another foundational resource that's broken up into chapters, and it can be streamed from our website, where it's not dubbed in Spanish yet because we're going to rework the film, but it is subtitled in Spanish. And this film examines the Nazis' rise to power, their consolidation of power, and why Jews were their primary targets for Nazi persecution and murder, and also how other groups of people were also persecuted by the Nazis. The film outlines how the Nazis and their collaborators led a state to war and to the murder of millions of people. So right now we're going to watch just the introduction. It's not very long, but you will see it also contains the Spanish language subtitles with it. So whenever you're ready, Margarita, we'll watch the introduction.
I'm sorry, Christina. I clicked on it and it takes me to another page. I'm not sure if I need to change the way that I share. Let me see.
1900, more than 50 million people from around the world.
Is everyone able to hear?
The Universal Exposition, a World's Fair intended to promote greater understanding and tolerance among nations, and to celebrate the new century, new inventions, exciting progress. The 20th century began much like our own, with hope that education, science, and technology could create a better, more peaceful world. What followed soon after were two devastating wars.
Okay, we can stop it right here. But again, this is available to be streamed on our website. It's free, and it's also on our YouTube channel, and it's also in several other languages as well. So if we can go back to the slides.
Yes, just one moment.
Okay, sure.
Let me get to where we were.
No problem. Take your time. Thank you for navigating all of this.
I think we're on 10.
Yes, we're on slide 10. We have worksheets available in Spanish to guide students through watching the film. But we do want to caution that the images and the rest of the film can be very graphic in nature. And we encourage educators to be cautious as to what grade level they're teaching, and to consider if this is an appropriate film to watch. Of course, watch it beforehand before students get to watch it. So our next resource is on the next slide. This is our interactive timeline activity, and this is one of the most popular activities that we have. This is a timeline activity lesson that is structured around a multi-layered wall timeline that can be adapted to the specific classroom needs of a teacher. It can be a point of reference in a unit of study, and it's also a great tool to foster critical thinking. So if you look here at the slide, you'll see that the timeline can be put up on the wall, and it can be left up so that students can go back and refer to it. And through the timeline activity, we look at the relationship between Nazi policy, World War II, historic events, and also individual experiences. How all of these three themes of Nazi policy, World War II, and historical events are impacting individuals, various individuals. So if you go to the next slide, we have timeline activity cards that look at individuals who were alive during the Holocaust and whose lives were impacted. I think most of us recognize the person in this card, Anne Frank, and we have now translated the entire timeline activity cards into Spanish, and they're also available on our website now in both English and Spanish. If you look at the next slide, we have also translated the cards that look at the laws and decrees that were passed, especially anti-Jewish decrees, but we also look at the decrees against other people, other groups of people who were victims of Nazi persecution. And on the next slide, our timeline activity cards also look at the impact of historical events on the Holocaust. For example, the start of World War II, and then the U.S.'s involvement when the U.S. is bombed by Pearl Harbor. So again, these are materials that lay the foundation of the history. And toward the end of today's presentation, I will show you how you can request to have a printed set of timeline activities sent to you free of charge. This is something that we offer to teachers because we know it can be very expensive to print these cards. It's very time consuming. And so we have funding to print them for teachers and to send them as well, free of charge, free of shipping. So we go to the next slide. This is a project that has really helped us to build our understanding of the Holocaust and responses to the Holocaust at the local and regional level. So our Spanish language resources include lessons that look at specific events of the Holocaust. And we provide many primary and secondary sources that help to examine the historical evidence the way that historians do. So in 2016, the museum launched a crowdsourcing project called History Unfolded, which you see right here. Through the contributions of hundreds of volunteers, including classrooms in Puerto Rico, the project received newspaper articles from Puerto Rico and from all over the United States, all of the 50 states from the 1930s and 1940s that reported on events of the Holocaust. So as a result of receiving a classroom from Puerto Rico, their contribution of articles from the newspaper in San Juan, we decided to look into other Spanish language newspapers published in the US at the time and how these newspapers also reported on events of the Holocaust. And we decided to create a lesson plan using various Spanish language newspaper articles and how they were reporting on one particular aspect of this story at the same time. So if we go to the next slide, because of this research, we were able to create a lesson plan on the voyage of the St. Louis, which we'll learn about in a moment, using the articles from 3 Spanish language newspapers from Brownsville, Texas, from Los Angeles, and from San Juan. And if you look right there at the slide, you will see here screenshots of 2 of the newspaper articles, different articles from different places, reporting on the same topic. And if we go to the next slide, we continue to look at the history. And one of the things that we will do right now is, Margarita, if we can show the animated map of the voyage of the St. Louis. I'll give you a moment. I know it takes a while to navigate everything.
Okay, and at this point, do I press play?
Yes. And the narration will kick in a moment, but this is also available in Spanish as well. We have it narrated in Spanish with the text also in Spanish, but I'm not sure everybody speaks Spanish, so we're going to listen to it in English.
With Hitler's rise to power, the Nazis began the systematic persecution of Jews in Germany. Nazi violence and the destruction of Jewish-owned property spread throughout many cities during the Kristallnacht pogrom of November 1938. Many Jews decided to leave Germany in the face of this growing threat. Their preferred destinations were the British Mandate of Palestine and the United States. However, both imposed quotas strictly limiting the number of emigrants. Desperate to escape Nazi Germany, 937 passengers, almost all of them Jewish refugees, boarded the ship St. Louis and departed Hamburg for Havana, Cuba on May 13, 1939. About 2 weeks later, they arrived in Havana. Cuban officials refused to allow the refugees to land, claiming that the passengers' landing certificates, purchased from a corrupt consular official in Germany, were invalid. Only 28 passengers, among them 22 Jews who had secured valid Cuban visas, were allowed to disembark in Havana. The rest lingered on the ship for 5 days, as a representative of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee negotiated with the Cuban government. Negotiations failed. The ship was ordered out of Cuban waters and sailed slowly toward Miami. Telegrams requesting refuge were sent to the White House and U.S. State Department, but entry was denied. The St. Louis turned back toward Europe. During the return voyage, 4 Western European countries agreed to take the refugees. The passengers disembarked in Antwerp on June 17, 1939, after more than a month at sea. With the German invasion of Western Europe in 1940, many of the St. Louis passengers were again trapped under Nazi rule.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you.
I'll go back to the slide deck now.
Okay, thank you so much. So this animated film and also our Holocaust Encyclopedia articles in English and Spanish on the voyage of the St. Louis can provide the historical context for understanding the journey of the St. Louis. And the lesson plan asks students to examine, to read these newspaper articles, and we ask students to write questions that they may have about it. Now, the articles are available. They were written originally in Spanish. We've also provided an English translation, so these can be used in different classrooms. You don't have to be a Spanish classroom to use this resource. We also encourage this lesson plan to be used also to look at the global impact of the Holocaust. And one of the things that this lesson plan does is it gets at the question that many students and many of our visitors ask: why didn't the Jews of Europe just leave? If things were so bad, why didn't they get out? And here's an example of people trying to leave and the obstacles that they faced in trying to find a place of refuge. The St. Louis was not the typical story, but it does get at that issue. And through using these newspaper articles, students will read a primary source, the newspaper article, and then they will read the Holocaust Encyclopedia articles as secondary sources of information, and also watch this animated map because it's also another secondary source that they can use to better understand the broader history. Because we know that primary sources, that one primary source doesn't usually teach you everything that you need to know behind an issue. So we really encourage teachers to use the encyclopedia articles as secondary sources to round out the information so students can have a better view. I know we're kind of running out of time already, so I'm just going to ask Margarita, we probably won't have time to read the newspaper articles like we had planned, but if we can jump ahead to a couple of other slides. We do have worksheets translated in Spanish as well, of course, in English for students to answer questions. And then if we go to the next slide, we were going to ask you, but we will share those links with you. Again, Margarita is going to give you the document with all of the links to all of the resources that we're talking about so that you can explore them and share them with educators who you know would find these useful. And then when we go to the next one, we also encourage, again, reading the Holocaust Encyclopedia articles on the voyage of the St. Louis, because they paint a broader picture of the history more than the newspaper articles do. And again, we're teaching students to think like historians. So if we go to the next slide, this is probably one of my, I don't know if favorite is the right word, but this collection, the Anthony Acevedo collection, is one of the ones that has touched me personally. I think all of them have, really, but this is probably in the top 5. With that understanding that our classrooms are changed, and according to a recent study, 29% of our students are of Latino descent. They may not speak Spanish as a first language, but they may not connect to this history. They may not feel that they see themselves in this history. This history has been largely portrayed as a European history because, of course, it took place in Europe. And now we look at it through the lens of how Americans responded. We can look at it through the lens of Israel today and in the past and the establishment of the State of Israel. But it's often hard for our students who are from other minority groups to see themselves in this history. And this is, again, a way to build that cultural competency, to build that bridge between histories. And that's why the story of Anthony Acevedo is so important. Anthony Acevedo was a Mexican-American born in California in 1924 to parents who were from Mexico. At the age of 17, actually prior to that, his family was repatriated to Mexico when he was only 13 years old. He did not speak Spanish well. He had hardly visited Mexico, but now his family, if you know the history of Mexican repatriation, that's another connector to his story. But because he is an American-born citizen, he is drafted into the Army at the age of 17. And at the end of 1944, he is sent to fight in the war. He trains as a medic, and he is sent to Europe, and he is taken prisoner during the Battle of the Bulge. And From there, this is where his story intersects directly with the Holocaust. From there, he was one of 350 American POWs taken from a prisoner of war camp to a German concentration camp called Berge an der Elster. This was a subcamp of the larger Camp Buchenwald. If you know Elie Wiesel's story, he wrote Night. He was the founding chair of our museum. He was liberated from Buchenwald. Well, Anthony Acevedo was in a camp nearby. And Anthony Acevedo had a very special relationship with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and his family is still very much in touch with us. He donated his collection to the museum in 2010, including his diary. His diary is very significant because it's the first diary we ever received of a person in captivity. We have diaries of people in hiding, but of an American in captivity in a Nazi concentration camp in Germany. So I won't share anything more about him, because if we go to the next slide, you're going to see a short film. We have taken certain stories from certain collections, and we have created a series of 5 animated videos. The series is called Behind Every Name, and it's really, and I'm speaking personally now as a Latina, as a Latina of Mexican descent. It's very meaningful to have Anthony Acevedo included in this series. So we're going to watch it, but before we do, I want to mention that it's also now dubbed in Spanish, but we're going to watch the English animated video of Anthony Acevedo called Tony, A Soldier's Journey.
You can see it, Christina?
He,
Thank
yes.
you.
Anthony Tony Acevedo.
Can you raise the volume?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
The 275th Infantry Regiment, 70th Infantry Division.
I think I'm at 100.
In freezing temperatures and heavy snow, along with 600,000 fellow Americans, he faced a ferocious
That's
German
the highest
offensive
it goes. I'm sorry, Christina.
That's fine.
during the brutal 6-week battle between December 1944 and January 1945. Tens of thousands were killed or wounded. It was Tony's first combat experience, and he bravely tended to the wounded under machine gun fire. We went to battle, and on my assignments, I headed with Company B. I just followed. I carried my duffel bag and all my equipment with me, and everybody used to laugh at me and yell at me and say, "Anthony, drop that, drop all that stuff. They're gonna kill you. You're a sore thumb, you." I said, "No, that's gonna save my life." We were marching towards a ridge. I heard an echo, "Medic, medic." There were machine guns going on back and forth, and I was carrying my stuff with me, so finally I picked up the sound and I started to head downhill. Then I saw up ahead a cave with Germans. Well, there are about 6 Germans in there with machine guns. I mean, you thought there were thousands of them. And at that time, when they start shooting at me, my stuff went up in the air, my duffel bag and everything. I fell on the ground and crawled to my helmet. Before I knew it, I was with the fellas that were wounded. I had my prayer book with me, and I would use some phrases that wouldn't be too long, but enough for that person, that soldier, to motivate him, make him feel motivated, feel free of fear. That's what he was. I was afraid. Germans were getting closer and closer. We ran out of ammunition until finally we were caught when the Germans came up the hill, and we had to surrender.
The Germans took us. They forced us to get our boots off and walk down the slope barefooted in the snow. It was up to our waists and marched for about almost a mile to the trucks.
They were sent to Stalag 9B, camp for prisoners of war near Bad Orb, Germany. Tony became prisoner number 27016. Conditions in the crowded camp were terrible. Tony used the limited medical supplies that he had managed to save in order to treat the sick and wounded. In January 1945, German officers began identifying and separating Jewish POWs and those whom they believed to be Jews from the rest of the American soldiers. Tony was also separated, perhaps because he was Mexican-American. The newly separated group, including Tony, were then transported to Berge an der Elster, a forced labor camp in Germany. Much like the conditions in the prisoner of war camp, food was scarce and prisoners were given little sustenance for the hard days of forced labor.
The bread was a mix of barley with sawdust, ground glass, and ground sand. It would make you sick to the stomach.
Disease and malnutrition would soon plague the American prisoners.
On one occasion, we received a package, a Red Cross package. That's how I got my diary.
Throughout his time in the camp, Tony kept a secret diary of his experiences. He wrote in it nearly every day. In it, he recorded how his group were forced to clear tunnels to make way for an underground factory that Nazi officials hoped would be out of sight of Allied bombers.
March 21st, 1945. More planes came over today. Bombs were dropped not very far from here. Another one of our boys is pretty low today. He's not expecting to live tonight. April 3rd, 1945. Excellent news today. Americans are only 100 kilometers from here. Rumors are that we are to be moved away.
The Nazi guards realized that the American troops were closing in. They evacuated the POWs from Berge on a forced march.
April 9th, 1945. We marched 10 kilometers today. We started out with 304 men. Now we have 287. April 20th to 22nd, 1945. Day and night it rained. Every man was wet from top to bottom. Every 25 yards there lay 3 or 4 men. Men that couldn't make the march had to drop out. They were shot. April 23rd, 1945. We were liberated today.
The 350 American POWs at Berge an der Elster, approximately 70 died. Most of them died or were executed during the forced evacuation of the camp. Tony's fountain pen miraculously endured his imprisonment. It allowed him to secretly document his first-hand account of life as an American prisoner of war in Germany, and would bear witness to the dates and causes of his fellow soldiers' deaths. This was, he explained, his moral obligation.
God gave me that ink to last.
So as you can see, his story is very unique. His background, but not only his background, but what he contributed to this history and our understanding of this history through his diary and through the rest of his collection. Tony, as we called him, he passed away in 2018. But his collection can be found on our website, and it's one of the links you'll receive in the document that Margarita is going to share with you. We recorded his testimony mostly in English, and then I did a short interview with him in Spanish. So we do have a little bit of his testimony in Spanish, some very encouraging words from him in Spanish as well. This again is something that can be used in the classroom because it's short enough. Several teachers are using it, and they've reported to us that their students are really connecting with this because he shares a similar background with some of the students that are in their classrooms. But this is a story for everybody, no matter what your background, and because of what he's contributed to this history. So if we go to the next slide, just to end with the content portion, looking at the theme of refuge in Latin America. So I did mention earlier that we do have Holocaust Encyclopedia articles that look at this topic and look at various countries. There was no concerted effort by any Latin American government to rescue, although there were certain Latin American leaders who did give approval to bring in refugees, Jewish refugees who were seeking a safe haven. But there were also many obstacles to going to Latin America, primarily because a lot of countries in Latin America at that time didn't really have an infrastructure to support refugees or large numbers of immigrants. And yet these stories are pretty remarkable. We have a project to work with Latin American countries and Latin American organizations to digitize their collections, or in some cases, they give us the actual physical collection that we have. And some of them you can find on our website. There's a lot to be said about Latin America and seeking refuge in Latin America. We're working on a lesson plan that will look at 5 countries as case studies, looking at what we call the pull factors in immigration, but also what is pushing them back from going there. The St. Louis is an example of that. We saw the pushback against the St. Louis, against the passengers on the St. Louis. But here are 2 examples of collections that we have from Latin America. If you look on the left-hand side and you look closely, if you read Spanish, you will see this is a passport, and this person actually was able to go to Colombia in 1938. So what is the story behind that? This is a collection from George Landau. George was a Viennese Jewish teenager when he was able to leave Vienna after the Anschluss, after the annexation, and he was able to go to Colombia. And he lived there for 3 years before he was able to come to the US. So in a lot of cases, certain countries in Latin America were kind of like the first stop before many of them either went to another country in Latin America, or they were able to come to the US, or after the war, some of them went to Israel. George Landau, interestingly enough, went on to become the US ambassador to Chile, to Paraguay, and to Venezuela. And his son recently served as the US ambassador to Mexico. So a lot of very interesting connections there. The picture that you see on the right-hand side, these are German Jewish refugees in the Dominican Republic, in a small community in the northern part of the country called Sosua. That is another very complex history, studying the Evian Conference of 1938 and how this is an outgrowth of that conference when Rafael Trujillo offered to take up to 100,000 Jewish refugees. But his reasons for doing so were not so benevolent. I'm not going to say more because I encourage you to go to the links that Margarita is going to share with you that gives you more of this history. But we do have a vast, we have a pretty vast amount of collections either from Latin America or referencing Latin America. And when we did the webinar, which I know Mr. Rosenfeld and Margarita attended in May, we featured Dr. Miriam Kasanoff. She is a child survivor of the Holocaust. She is the head of Holocaust education for Miami-Dade County Schools, where 70% of the student population They speak Spanish as a first language at home. And she talked about the impact for them at looking at refuge in Latin America, because either they or their parents or their grandparents came from many of these countries that our collections reference. And so that is a great connection for them to look at the difficulties of finding a place of safety. Also, Holocaust Museum Houston was part of our webinar. And Holocaust Museum Houston, and we can share the links with you, I'll send them to Margarita. They have a wonderful ebook learning program that is in English and Spanish. So they loan books through their program that are in either language that come with lesson plans. So if you know educators who need more resources and they need actual books, they can turn to Holocaust Museum Houston. Also, the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum has lesson plans on their website in Spanish based on their local stories and survivors who went to Dallas after the war. So if we go to the next slide, and then we can take some questions. This is a program that we have, that I run, that's called the Community of Holocaust Education Centers. And every 2 years, we recruit new Holocaust organizations to take part in this program, to learn about our resources, and to look at how they can take our resources and integrate them into what they do. The Dallas and the Houston Museum have both done that, and Miami-Dade County Schools, for example, is part of this program, and so they use our resources, a lot of them in Spanish now. But we have centers all over the world. The ones that are all over the world, all in the United States, and most of them are on the East Coast, but we have tried very hard to expand to the western part of the country. The ones in orange are new partners that are going to be coming in February. But we also have the Belfer National Conference. The Belfer National Conference has been in existence since 1994. Due to the pandemic, we started a virtual program, and it is now fully virtual, and it will be ongoing, and really anybody in the world can attend. So we've also shared that link on the document you'll receive. It's asynchronous, it's virtual, and it's asynchronous. So you can attend it anytime after it goes live. You can watch it on demand. And then we transport the videos that you watch during Belfer, and we put them on our website. So it's another wonderful way of getting a bigger overview of our educator resources that are all accessible on our website. So with that, if we have time for questions, if anybody has any questions or comments. And here, this is the last slide. You can scan the code, or you can go to the link and you can order a printed set for free of the Timeline Activity cards. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. And I want to thank Margarita again for reaching out, and Mr. Rosenfeld for everything that you do for the museum and for education and working with us. This is a really wonderful relationship. Thank you, everybody. And if there's time for questions, I know we have a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Christina. Oh, we do have a question from Phil.
Sorry, I was muted. I didn't want to get in the way of other questions, but I did want to thank you for an incredible presentation. I learned so much from it that I can't wait to explore more and possibly even brush up on my high school Spanish so I can take advantage of the materials. But I wondered, you mentioned that with regard to the countries in Latin America that took in refugees, I have spoken to some of the refugees and their families about what made such a welcoming environment. And some of them talked about the family values, the feeling of social justice that permeates Hispanic culture, And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, your perspective on that.
Sure. I think a lot of it can depend on the country that they went to. And in many cases, it was the local people who helped them feel welcome. Like if you look, for example, at the Dominican Republic, it wasn't so much the elected leaders, but it was the local people who helped them. And in the case of Sosua, you had many more young men as refugees going to the Dominican Republic and not as many young women. And the reason why I say young is because these countries, and if you were younger, you were seen as being able to do more work and maybe a more desirable candidate to be accepted into a country. And so what happened in the case of the Dominican Republic, there were more men than women. And some of those men ended up marrying local women and staying there because they had family roots there. They were married to a woman who had her family there. And that helped them in many cases. Also, too, if you look at countries like Argentina already had a well-established, fairly large Jewish population. Even today, it's the 7th largest in the world. So there was an infrastructure to support either religious life or Jewish cultural life and Jewish customs. And you might have had family members there already. And to the notion of social justice. Some of the communities, especially in places like Argentina and Uruguay, where you did have established Jewish communities, they were very much well aware of what's happening. Some of them had left Europe just before things happened, and they had family members who were there. So even if it wasn't that they were welcoming family members as refugees, they knew what the refugees who were coming in, what they were facing. And in many cases, especially if you look at Uruguay, the Jewish community in Uruguay actually went to the banks to help raise money to pay for their entrance fees to enter the country. If you look at Mexico, Mexico was very, it was the only democratically elected government at that time in Latin America. And it was left leaning. And Mexico made it a point to welcome refugees who were escaping countries where democracy had fallen apart. Largely, Mexico welcomed very much Spanish Republican refugees. But at the same time, you had many young European Jews who had gone to fight with the Spanish Republicans. And when they lost by 1939, when the Spanish Civil War ended, many of them fled to other countries in Europe that were then subsequently overtaken. So you did have many groups in Mexico, especially that were led by intellectuals and artists like Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, who were very much wanting to promote the notion of social justice and to help rescue people who were fleeing fascist countries. And that's why you did have Jewish refugees interspersed with Spanish Republican refugees going to Mexico because of their more left-leaning views and their values on looking at democracy as a whole.
Great. Thank you so much. That was terrific.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Margarita, you had your hand raised.
Yes, I had a question. It was just following up on Phil's question and the information that you were sharing about Latin American countries that were welcoming to Jewish refugees. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the event that you shared with me from a few weeks ago, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society event held in Ecuador. Thanks to you, I found out about that organization. I was able to sit in on the event. And before I stop talking and let you talk about it, because you know more about it, I was just really impressed, not just with the work that Ecuador did, 60, 70 years ago, welcoming Jewish refugees to their land, but how they continue to implement that work of social justice and, loving their community and their neighbors. They are, I believe this was quoted as a statistic, they are the #1 country in South America taking in Colombian and Venezuelan refugees and displaced persons. So if you could talk about what Ecuador is doing, that I think that would be interesting.
Sure. Well, I can talk with you about what Ecuador is doing on the educational front. I've been working with the team that put together the program. Ecuador is actually working with Colombia to promote Holocaust education, but also taking Holocaust education as a lens for dealing with the conflicts that they've undergone, the violence that they have undergone and seen and been victims of in many cases, especially in Colombia. So they are working to put together a mutual site to promote teaching and best lessons that teachers are submitting. This is coming from the ministries of education, as well as the Jewish community in Ecuador and in Colombia. And, you know, they are small communities, but they have taken in many Venezuelan refugees. It's not been without incident. It's kind of similar to what we see happening here. There are always challenges that are faced. There's been pushback. There's been the rise of nationalist groups. But working with these two teams, we do see that, for example, they're taking what we've examined and the challenges of finding a place of refuge. They're taking that same idea and promoting our lesson plans on challenges of escape to the teachers, just to think about that, for students to think about why people flee. And they've also worked with us so that we have digitized their collections, and they're now available. They're not necessarily on our website yet, but we are working to bring their collections here to look at Jewish life from that time period, to look at Jewish refuge from that time period for both countries. So it's a very unique project, but they're super dedicated. And hopefully when all of that is accessible and on their websites, we can share it with you as well.
Thank you, Christina. Well, I think we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting. We're a few minutes over, but that's okay. This has been an excellent presentation, truly one of the most meaningful to me in my career. I want to thank you again, Christina, for being here with us, and not just for presenting and sharing about the resources and the wonderful humanitarian work of the museum, but for what you do every day on a day-by-day basis. Thank you again to Phil for honoring us with your presence and for your support always. And as you've mentioned a few times, Christina, I will follow up to all of the attendees of the meeting with copies of the slides and the resource documents.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Have a good day.
Christina.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you again,
Bye.
Phil. Bye-bye.
Bye.